Good afternoon, everyone. Let's start. It's already 1:35. My name is Maria Claudia Bodino, and together with my team, we are really delighted to welcome you all today in this new iTalk series from the Digital Innovation Lab of the European Commission. The Innovation Lab, the iLab, is basically a new initiative. It's about exploring, but also experimenting, concretely promoting new initiative, also new way to create collective knowledge. And we really aim in improving the public sector, how public sector works, and also how we can contribute to the public good as public servants. We are quite young, and this is our first public series of events where we open the door to people also outside the institution. And we have participants from academia, from the private sector, and also from civil society. By the way, I just read before that today we have also people from Africa, so I'm really happy. We are looking for new synergies. We are also trying to create new partnership and cooperation with existing innovative initiatives, for example, Innovation Lab, maybe also GovTech and the spin-off from academia and civil society. In case you can be interested, please feel free to get in touch with us and with our team. As you know, and also if you already follow our previous iTalks, the European Commission has declared this year the European Year of Skills. And specifically with these iTalks, we really want to understand with use cases how different stakeholders are trying to address the lack of data skills. And we are trying to look at concrete use cases, but also challenges from different angles. We look at different actors, before from GovTech, from private companies, from academia, and today we have Barbara from the OECD. Last week, we had also a great talk with David Eves from USL, from the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose, and he is also the co-founder of this great initiative that is called Teaching Public Service in the Digital Age. Today, we are really honored to sit down with Barbara Ubaldi. She's the head of the digital government and also data unit and deputy head of division in the division of open and innovative government within the OECD Public Governance Directorate. She will tell us and she will share with us how to develop data literacy in the public sector in order to contribute to a more mature digital government. Thanks a lot, Barbara, for your time. Thanks a lot for your contribution to this initiative. We are really happy to have you on board. And thanks, Athena and Christophe, for your help and support in the organization. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria Claudia. Thank you, colleagues from the Commission, also for having invited us to join this interesting talk and to share our thoughts around this very key topic when we look at the digital maturity of governments around the world. I'll share my presentation. Hopefully,
I think you can just need to to share it in a full screen as before.
Should be coming.
Maybe it's loading. Let's see. Yes, now
we can see it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. So just to set things in a context, for us, it's not possible to talk about digital government without talking about data literacy. And at the same time, It's very essential and important when we look at governments and public sectors more broadly to discuss about data literacy within the context of the general challenge governments are facing to be capable to utilize the opportunities provided by the digital age to design better services, to design better policies, and therefore to bring values, might this be to citizens or to businesses or to the civil society more broadly. So for us, the two topics are really very much connected. And it all starts with the journey that we engaged with at the OECD now over almost like 25 years ago to support governments in becoming more capable to use technology. There was the eGov era that slowly, as governments became more mature in using the digital opportunities, has been embedded in a broader concept that we refer to when we talk about digital government. And what is the main essential difference between the two from an OECD perspective? When we were talking about eGov, we were very much focusing at the efforts governments were undertaking to transfer in an online platform processes and practices and operations that had been thought and designed in the analog era. For example, to access a public service, you needed 5 steps. These 5 steps were being transferred into an electronic environment so that people could undertake at least 4 out of those 5 steps online rather than having to cover them physically in person. Now, with the digital government era, the radical change is not only a language change, but it really refers to the fact that governments are utilizing the opportunities provided by the digital age, technologies, also innovative and emerging technologies and data to rethink processes, operations, and the way things are done and services are provided. So activities inside of the public sector, but also outside of the public sector. So the whole idea is to transform practices that exist on paper, have been existing for quite some time, translated into an electronic environment, into something that enables governments to better use the resources they have available. So to support this shift, that is not a minor shift because it's about breaking down silos, it's about connecting, it's about changing things that are comfortable for many parts of the administration, have been comfortable for many years. We've been working with the member countries of the OECD towards the adoption of a recommendation. A recommendation of the OECD is not like a directive of the European Commission that needs to be translated into a national law or legislation, but still it's a soft law. And when governments commit to the adoption of a recommendation, they commit to take concrete actions to take steps to implement the provisions of a recommendation. And the digital government recommendation adopted in 2014 has been applied in a number of countries to try to help governments make this jump, make this shift from e-government to digital government. Therefore, as we were working with governments around the world to answer the question that policymakers were putting on the table, okay, great, the recommendation reads very well, but how do you make it happen? What does it mean having a government that is really mature when it comes to being digital? So we, in working with governments, identified 6 key dimensions of a digital government around which we work with governments to understand how mature they are in strengthening their digital government, what progresses they've made, what gaps exist. And you'll understand in a moment why I'm starting from this seemingly very far away topic from data literacy, because that's a grounding. That sets the framework in which it's worth asking, what does it mean fostering data literacy, and what do we need to do to foster data literacy inside of governments and inside of public sectors? So if you look at the slide, the 6 dimensions that were identified for a digital government were digital by design, data-driven, government is the platform, open by default, proactive government, and user-driven government. So you see one of the 6 dimensions, it's being data-driven, because we do acknowledge that there's no government that can be fully digitally operating unless the government recognizes the importance of data as a key strategic asset, together with people, resources, human resources, civil servants, and financial resources. So I will not go in detail on each of the 6 dimensions, but I will come back to the idea of the skills and talent that we need to make sure that the government is more data-driven and therefore capable to use data to also reinforce the other 5 dimensions. Data becomes an enabler to think about government that provides a platform where different tools can be used and reused by the different parts of the public sector. Data is part of the open by default movement, because when we talk about open by default, we also talk about a digital government that provides data available as open data. Data becomes essential to design services that can be provided in a more proactive way, and data becomes an enabler to understand better what are the needs of the user without always starting from a perspective of the public sector and the government which designs the service. So in that sense, government then gave us a second challenge. And the challenge was, okay, great. Now that we understand that those are the 6 dimensions that make a government really digital, and we try to understand what are the gaps that we need to fill in to become more mature on each of the 6 dimensions, what are the skills and talent we need to have? Because clearly governments, as society became more digital, as the economy became more digital, realized the need of keeping up with the pace. And they realized that they had oftentimes gaps in terms of skills available inside of the public sector. So we started thinking in terms of, okay, if we broadly want to understand what are the skills needed, we need to understand the broad picture and not just think about skills. That's why we talk about digital talent and skills in the public sector, because we wanted to try to understand not only the specific skills that needed to be brought on board and the specific profiles that needed to be brought on board to be able to use data as a key strategic asset, but we wanted to understand the broader context in which having people skilled to use data and to understand the relevance of data made sense. So first of all, our framework looks at the broader environment that needs to be put in place to make sure that civil servants brought on board with the right skills and profile, for example, for data, can actually use these skills, can actually feel that they are providing value, that they fit within an environment where they have a place. So having the right leadership in place, for example, that recognizes the importance of having people who understand the value of data, even if they are not technically skilled to use data, even if they are not data scientists, data analysts, but they grow progressively aware of the importance of the type of data that need to be identified to be able, for example, to design policies that better respond to emerging needs. There's a need of having an organizational structure that helps to experiment, that helps to innovate, that helps to, for example, prototype, test, see what works and what doesn't work. Data becomes a key element that supports innovation as it helps, for example, to identify new ways of doing things and to experiment. Well, we need to have an organizational structure where those experimentation can happen, where that becomes a way for the different parts of the public sector to learn together. For example, there's a huge role that local governments have to play in this sense when we think about using data to respond to user needs. And the local governments are oftentimes the frontliner when it comes to responding to the needs of the users. So how do we, for example, put together in an organizational structure which is more flat than it uses to be inside of the public sector, civil servants who represent different parts of the organization so that they can together identify, for example, the needs of the users that are subject to change, the data and the evidence that is needed to observe that evolution, and then they work together with people who are actually experts on the use of data to do something with that, to do some estimation, to do some foresight, to better inform changes that need to happen in the design of services. And that brings to the last point, which is the ways of working. When we think about innovative ways of working, it's not just about telework. That's just part of it, right? And many of us have been in hybrid ways of working for long before the pandemic came. When we think about ways of working which are modern, we think about multidisciplinary teams, for example, that come together to solve problems. We think about investing on teams rather than investing on projects. And it's a team that in many cases has a diversified set of skills, including people who understand data. That's essential because if we think about identifying the right people and we bring those people on board, but these people oftentimes with skills and literacy on data are people who are used to work in environments which are dynamic, which are agile, where they can work together with people from different expertise. You don't do much with data if you just remain within your own bubble. So the point is, if we have the right type of environment, then we can think about bringing on board the people with the right skills. And when we go a bit more in depth. And in this case, we use the second pillar of our framework to understand the skills that are needed to support digital government maturity. You see that we've been looking at the number of skill sets. And again, for the interest of time, I'm not going to be one by one through all of them, but I will focus on the ones that we identified with the name of the skills to be able to be a user of a digital government opportunity inside of the public sector, meaning what are the skills that we think need to be more or less present across all different layers of the civil service, even if the level of technicality can differ, can change. And you see that one of the 5 categories of the essential skills, number 5, it's skills and talent which support data-driven government. But before I come to the last bit, which is the 5th category, which is pertinent to our conversation today, it's essential for me to start from the first set of skills which are needed, because being data-driven supports the other 4 areas. Cannot be seen in isolation from the need to have people across all different layers of civil service who have the skills to support the digital transformation. When we talk about digital transformation, we talk about designing and providing services which are more accessible, facilitating the participation of users, businesses and people, individuals, or also civil society organizations in the process of designing of policies and services. We think about new collaborations. We think about stronger transparency in government's decisions and operations. And we think about evidence-based policymaking. So if you think about data as an enabler of all of them, it's obvious the value that data can have. And you see, I'll come back to this point when I talk about the specific skills on data, because the person with the skills on data needs eventually to also have skills that support the digital transformation, to be able to make the most of data and not just remain within the individual bubble. So it needs to be a person who also has some sort of skills which are the ones required to advance the digital transformation. The second set of skills, which is essential for digital government, is the capability to understand users and their needs. And as I said before, data can be an essential tool to shift from the mindset of I am the government and I better understand what's your need, or I am the government and I need to change how I do things to bring efficiency to myself, to a context in which I start from the user and I, for example, use data on user preferences, on users' behaviors, on users' satisfaction to understand where there's a need to change and adjust how the service is designed or is offered. The third set of skills has to see with collaborative environments. There is no digital government that cannot count on the capacities of different parts of the public sector to break down silos and to work together. We hear so much that digital is mainstreamed, meaning digital is no longer only under the responsibility of a coordinating entity for digital government. That coordinating entity has a responsibility to set the strategic direction for the whole government, but then needs to work together with the different parts of the administration. Going back to data, if data needs to support the digital transformation, we need to be able to break down silos, and data need to be interoperable from a technical but also semantic point of view. For example, we need to be able to have data that can be integrated and merged. And now, in many cases, the obstacle is not technical. There are laws, for example, that impede public sector one from the second institution within the public sector to share data, to join data, to mutually access relevant databases, which is essential in many cases to create new services or to make the service more agile in its access to the public users. So the idea is that a more digital government requires people with skill and talent to collaborate, to work together. And in that sense, these are skills that also support the way of working, which needs to be different also from people who are the people with the data literacy that is required. For example, collaborations requires also participatory processes with the people outside of the public sector, for example, users of services. Well, it's not obvious by default that people who come on board with the data literacy necessarily have the sensitivity, the awareness, the understanding of how important it is to engage with the broader ecosystem. So the idea is that as we think about specific skills for data, how can these be complemented with skills that support higher collaborations across the public sector? And then there's a third element in terms of skills, which is very much essential for the need to build a more trustworthy environment as governments go more digital. So it's really about securing the use of technologies and data, the public interest. So it's not only about personal data protection, but it's about security of essential piece of information, is the capacity of handling data in an ethical manner. And that becomes more and more relevant, not only for the use of data, but also for a use of emerging technologies, primarily artificial intelligence, for example. It's about making sure that civil servants, as they increase the use of data, are aware of the accountability they have to show in the capacity of using data in a transparent and accountable manner. And it's about making sure that data that is essential is available to keep delivering services in a continuous manner. I think it was extremely obvious during the pandemic to what extent governments that had in place not only the digital platforms, but also the conditions for reusing data and for sharing data or for accessing data across the public sector could not only innovate how they were providing services, but they could ensure a continuous provision of services. So these are all generic skills that support digital government that we need to remember also as we try to bring on board people who have the more specific data literacy and profile that we need to be able to advance more rapidly as data-driven governments. And when we look at the specific skills, I start from the last point that you see in the presentation, which is data scientists and data analysts. They are not the only profiles that we need to bring on board. When we think about data literacy, we start from the first point. And first of all, we need to have people in place who know if there is a data strategy, for example, who is the person responsible for the data strategy? Who is the institution to go to when we want to understand about the whole of government approach on data? We need to have data stewards in place, for example, who within their own administration can create the culture of understanding of the importance of data, and they support not only the identification, the collection of data, but also they secure the data quality, and they secure that people inside their own administration are aware of this, and they support the sharing of the data from their administration with other administrations. We then need definitely to have people who know how to manage data, how to protect data, how to collect data, how to share data. So it's really the more managerial part, which goes beyond the use of data to do something else with it. It's really the whole idea of identifying people who are responsible for individual tasks in the entire data cycle, starting from the beginning when it comes to collecting data. So it's really understanding the data that is needed. And once the data is being identified, how to make sure the data is provided with the same quality across the administration. So it's about, for example, having people who can help design the standards or the guidelines for data production that can be coherently used across the whole administration. It's about having data who understand what it means, securing an ethical use of data. So people who can actually work together with the lawyers, but also with the policymakers to understand, for example, the different levels of assurance that need to be provided when data is being used for different purposes, to make sure that there's a consistent understanding, a consistent way of handling data ethically across the administration. We need people, for example, data scientists or data analysts, who can actually work across different policy sectors to identify opportunities for data application to improve policies and services. Therefore, people who can adopt empirical approaches, for example, to use data to anticipate, plan, but also to better deliver and monitor how policies are being implemented and they respond to the original purposes. Also using data to make changes when it's needed. We need people who are actually capable to understand what is open data. When we talk about open data, how not only you make sure that data is available as open data, but that you create the right partnership and the right understanding on the whole open data ecosystem in order to make sure that the data that is provided as open data meets actually the needs of the actors within the ecosystem that want to do something with that, that can do something with that. We talk so much, for example, about the GovTech, that by the within the OECD, like in the European Commission, we consider being the partnerships between the public sector and a whole set of actors within the broader ecosystem, including startups, academia, researchers. Well, open data in many cases become an important enabler for collaborations between the public sector and these actors of the GovTech ecosystem. Therefore, how can we have inside of the administration, inside of the different policy sectors, people who understand what data needs to be made available as open data so that the broader ecosystem can do something with that. So it's a really comprehensive set of skills, of talent, and of literacy intended in the broader sense that needs to connect the different dots. And really, it requires going beyond the understanding of the technicality of understanding data, and thinks more about data as a complement to a number of set of other skills which are essential to support a digital transformation. And just to conclude, I want to, building on the third pillar of our framework, I want to make an important point in our perspective. When working with governments on the digital transformation of public sectors or governments, their concern is about people with the right digital or even more data relevant profile coming to the public sector and then leaving very rapidly. And in many cases, the explanation is that salaries for a highly demanded profile, like a data scientist or a data analyst, are not as high within the public sector as they are within the private sector. Sure enough, there are many people who prefer a higher salary, considering the high demand of this profile. But there are many people who are highly motivated by the fact of working for the public sector and working for public interest. They have a strong sense of purpose when joining the public sector. The issue is that in many cases, because we don't create within public sectors the environment that I was mentioning earlier on, and we just think about bringing on board the people we think we need without considering the necessity of taking the necessary steps to retain these people, that the losses happen. And retaining these people implies having an environment where, for example, they can find their place. In many cases, it implies having job profiles that didn't exist before. And a few years ago, data scientists or data analysts were brought on board as temporary consultants, or there was the tendency to outsource tasks to data scientists who were brought on board from consultancy firms to join the public sector for specific purposes, and then they would leave. The whole idea of creating the environment that becomes appealing for these new profiles is also about connecting with the HR strategies and say, okay, if these people are so important and they are so essential, how do we make sure that they have their own place within the public sector? Therefore, we have job profiles that acknowledge the role, that make the role stable, that make the role consistent, which also implies mobility. These people can actually move around with their skills to support work in different policy sectors. So it's really about understanding how not only we bring on board these people, but we make sure that they have their own space so that we can retain them. We support also their development, and we allocate them to projects where they feel that they can have a value and they can have something to contribute. That's extremely important, because unless we do so, we keep thinking about bringing on board people with the right skills, but then we keep losing them. And in a way, we remain very much reliable on temporary presences, and we cannot make the most of these skilled people to support the radical transformation that we want to happen across the whole public sector. I stop here. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much, Barbara, for this presentation and the emphasis on connecting the dots and going beyond just simply plugging data scientists and team. We'd also appreciated the overall conclusion on bringing on board people, but allowing them to grow and to develop skills, and also being agile in developing their skills. So now we'll open the floor to more questions, because your presentation has actually generated a lot of questions on the Slido. For the ones that are not familiar with Slido, feel free to share your questions also in the chat here. I'll share my screen so you can see the questions. Give me just 1 second. Can you see the screen?
Yes, Athena, we can see.
Yes.
Perfect. So I think that to start with, we'll start with the first questions. When you started your presentation, someone asked initially that you mentioned how OECD moved from eGov to digital gov, but you still talk about data-driven and not data-informed approach. Has the OECD perspective changed on that topic, Barbara?
Yes, so in this case, I think it's more a matter of language in the sense that when we use driven, we really intend informed, meaning it's really the idea of starting from the data and not starting from a different need. So starting for us, basically in this case, data informed can be used as a synonym of data driven. That's our understanding.
Perfect. I hope this answered the question. You also mentioned the key role of local governments, but they are the ones that need probably more reskilling. Do you have any use case to share with the audience?
Yeah, I completely agree on the needs being at times more pressing at the local level to reskill. I think the best examples are examples that I have seen in countries that have focused on providing opportunities for the local level to reskill their personnel when they didn't have the possibility to actually enforce in such decisions. I think Spain has been a very good example of a country that has provided a number of tools from the central government, used at the central government to actually grow the skills at the local level stronger. There are another country that has emphasized a lot connecting with the local government. Again, those are two countries which do not have centralized systems. Therefore, they really try to provide tools that create incentives for the local government. Is Canada. Canada has really focused very much in transferring to the local level some of the good practices that they have at the central level. But I do agree that it's a big challenge in that sense. Some years ago, in the case of France, through the Open Government Data program, the central government was really encouraging the local level civil servants to themselves reuse open data to create new services, for example, for citizens. And they had a prize that was given by the central government to the very interesting examples. There was a specific category, local government, for services and tools which had been produced through the reuse of open government data by civil servants. So there are practices here and there, I think mostly building on the sharing of resources that exist at the central government to skill and reskill people.
Talking actually about cases here and there, there's a question about data literacy initiatives in the EU compared to South America and Asian countries. What's the OECD approach in comparing those?
I think there are great examples within the EU. I think the Data Governance Act in the EU has provided a huge incentive in a positive way for government to think about data governance in a broad perspective, not only in terms of should I have a chief data officer. For example, the case of Ireland, I find extremely interesting because as a part of the work that the government of Ireland is putting in place to make sure they have a solid data governance, they also do a lot to raise awareness of civil servants across the different parts of the administration about what it means being data literate. So if they don't have formal programs, perhaps putting people in front of a screen or around a table to actually teach data literacy, but through their initiatives that aim to reinforce their data governance model, they target data literacy across the public sector. And I am part of the data governance board of the government of Ireland, and I have been witnessing myself to what extent civil servants across the public sector understand more what's their role in supporting a data-driven administration. At the same time, you have countries like Korea that I think they have been very strategic and they have embedded the purpose of building the right skills and talent across different programs that they have. So they have a data strategy, they have an open data program that targets collaborations with the private sector. They have put in place some laws, for example, that protect civil servants who are very cautious about whatever responsibility they could have had in case the data they were managing would be made available as open data and there was a problem with the reuse of that open data. So the government, to actually incentivize civil servants to join the open data movement, also adopted specific legislations which protect civil servants from any secondary reuse of the data provided as open data, which is not under their responsibility when the use is not following the right values embraced by the government. So what I like about Korea is that Korea has tried to strategically embed actions to support data literacy and also digital literacy more broadly inside of the many different programs that they have. And then an example that I like a lot in Latin America has been Colombia. I think Colombia, again, has been another country that has tried to think about skills in a holistic approach. So they have very strong, for example, with their AI strategy, they have policy documents which set the strategic vision for the government for the year ahead. And they always identify, actually not for the year ahead, but for the government, the period the government is in place. And they always focus on very forward-looking topics. It might be data, it might be AI that support the digital transformation. And they always embed the need to strengthen the skills that are required inside of the public sector to support the specific adoption of an approach that they want to support through the specific policy document. So those are three different examples that are different approaches, but that I would equal in terms of understanding of the skills that you need to support a digital transformation on data or more broadly on digital.
Yes, I think your answer connects to the question, which is about if there are governments investing on life cycle journeys in digital training of their civil servants against of the siloed version of independent modules, which refers to what you said as a strategically well embedded in these programs. Going back now to this question, which
sorry, you know what? On that, I may complement because people might be interested that there are countries like Australia, the UK, Canada, and Italy is following this example now, that have established the so-called digital academies, which have as a purpose to build the skills of the civil servants. And these digital academies may differ very much, but they all try to do what the question was asking, meaning try to move towards the understanding that it's a journey that the civil servant goes through, and they try to accommodate the need of the institutions to understand where the gaps are, identify what are the needs in terms of skills that need to be either brought on board or complemented among the skills existing within the civil servants. So I would not be able to give one country that understood it entirely, but these countries that I mentioned, and Germany as well, is following the examples of these countries that I mentioned. Sorry, I just thought it was important.
Thank you very much for adding this. Actually connected to this question, since it's so important to implement such practices, someone is asking, how do you engage senior management with this approach? Please, can you provide some tips, examples on how to sell this strategy to be implemented?
That's the most difficult question. And first of all, it's in the long run, there's a need to bring on board leaders for digital transformation with the right profile. So people who understand that it's more about the transformation that you want to put in place and the digital tool that you are using. And there are governments that actually target specifically the leaders with specific programs in this sense, like Australia or Canada as well. They have programs that run across like a long period of a year. So it's not just a workshop, but is a continuous set of trainings that aim to put in place the right leaders, but also to create sort of networks among those leaders. For example, Colombia is another example that has this CIO network. So the idea is not only to bring on board CIOs with the right profile in the different public sector institutions, but also to create these councils of CIOs that under the, let's say, the flag of meeting regularly to share information are also target of capacity building programs. This is what we talk about when we talk about talent. So in that case, it's not about the specific skills, but it's about, having the profiles that support the transformation at the top level.
Yes, actually, like talking about talents, there's a question about how can we make sure that the public organization retain their talents. I think you covered this pretty well, but do you want to add any tips on this topic?
I think, you know, really it's connecting, first of all, connecting the need with the public sector in terms of skill and bringing on board the skill. So starting with having a clear understanding of the gaps and bringing on board the people who can fill those gaps. And then, as I said, making sure that they can have their own space within the administration in the long run. So really thinking about a growing path, a development path, which starts with the fact that they are brought on board because there's a need, not because it's fashionable. Second, making sure that they have their own space, their own profile, and then thinking about their development. They're not technical people. You know, I think a big failure of government to actually grow more mature in terms of e-government was that in many countries, the idea remained that it was about plugging a computer. Now, we don't have that opportunity anymore of making the mistake in terms of digital government. So if we don't think about this data literate people as people who can enable the transformation, and they're not just the techie who sit in their office, then we will fail. So retaining, it's also understanding that they have a key role to play and providing the space for these people to play that role.
As you mentioned, trends and hype, let's go now to a question about AI and how it's often a big buzzword nowadays. Which is your opinion about this? And let's try maybe to tie it back to data literacy.
Yeah. So I think that, first of all, we cannot not look into the use of AI across public sectors because it would be anachronistic. But reusing the words of a person that has inspired me a lot and keeps inspiring me a lot is Diego Piacentini, who was for a few years the chief digital champion of Italy. After 3 years, you know, in his role, he said, if public sectors could start with understanding the value of the technology they already have in place for what they have to do, that would be a great starting point before jumping on using artificial intelligence or any other emerging tech. This to say that I agree with this, meaning the hype in many cases means that governments just jump on the latest trend without having the capabilities, and we come back to the idea of talent and skills in place to be able to understand and assess if yes, it makes sense using artificial intelligence for a specific purpose or not. If it makes sense, then it's about making sure that it's used for the proper purpose, based on the right values. For example, the best examples I've seen around have been from countries that have established so-called task forces, that on one side were putting around the table users of public services, academia, private sector, to better understand how AI could be used to design better policies and better services, and then to use AI or apply AI within the public sector. They again had task forces or teams that had around the table a psychologist, an architect, a sociologist, a digital expert, a data expert, an AI expert. So they had this very multidisciplinary approach from both perspectives. And third, when it comes to data, as you were saying, we cannot disentangle and separate AI from data. So it's really, we know we are all familiar with books which have identified or highlighted how many biased policies are the results of a biased use of data. So let's all be cautious about the fact that data is very much connected with the use of AI. So starting with the right understanding of the ethical use of data that begins with the right choice of data to be utilized to inform AI is essential to make sure that AI leads to the results we want to achieve. And last but not least, I think there's a lot of skepticism when we talk about the use of artificial intelligence that immediately leads to the conclusion this will bring to the automation of many tasks and therefore the loss of many jobs. I think it's a very delicate conversation. Again, we need to be courageous and understand and admit and acknowledge that there is such concern. But I think it needs to be, the idea that there will be automation needs to be understood with the complementary set of actions that need to make sure that we have new jobs in place, because as automation might be part of the narrative, it's also true that we may need new people to support a correct use of AI with different profiles, like we were discussing in this iTalk today. So I really think it's a very complex issue, and the call is for governments not to jump on it just because it's trendy, to understand when it makes sense to use AI and then to use it in a correct way.
Yeah, I think that goes also now to the question about actually empirical approaches on how to anticipate, plan, and deliver and monitor all of this, especially since you're talking about AI, on how that we're not supposed to be jumping on it as governments. So do you have any practical example or use cases on this topic?
Listen, for that part, I can refer you to our OPSI, which is the Observatory on Public Sector Innovation platform, which actually gathers a number of interesting use cases, which look at how governments are doing anticipatory innovation, or they have foresight approaches to be able to, in this case, again, do it correctly, using data, using AI, but do it correctly. So I can post in the chat the link to the OPSI, because I think that's the best place where to go to find use cases of very innovative practices globally, not only from the OECD member countries.
Okay, perfect. And would you say that this is also your answer to the question about any publication with data literacy initiatives around the world that the OECD would have to share?
Yes, and also in the feel free to circulate the presentation that I have given today, and at the end you have a list of links to OECD publications, and people can reach out to me in case they have problems accessing them, and I'll be very happy to share them. Those are more specifically on data.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Maria Claudia, would you like to add anything? Because I think we've gone through all questions.
No, I mean, I really appreciate, when you were mentioning the importance of having multidisciplinary team, because I experienced this in my personal previous experience working with Diego. And this is really key, when you put around the same table people with different background, not just data engineers, but also maybe complete different approaches, complete different background. My question, Barbara, is, are you aware of current initiative, not from Europe, but maybe more from Asia, China maybe, where they are also trying to foster multidisciplinary approach in order to really create data-driven decision-making? Because this is sometimes another buzzword, no? During COVID, this was the case. We were looking for a big amount of data. We create different task forces. We collect data from mobility, from different areas. But then, when it was the moment to show let's say, policymakers input and also maybe sort of best practice, it was not easy, So my question for you is, do you know current initiatives that are really, really inspiring that we can look at from the European Commission perspective?
So what is very interesting is that the countries that have been more forward-looking in this sense have been the Anglo-Saxon countries. Mm-hmm. So the UK and Australia have been very forward-looking in this sense, and they keep having initiatives that have been inspiring others. And here I come to the second part of my answer, which is, interesting enough, we are completing a regional study on the status of digital government in Latin America. And probably because the Latin Americans have been listening a lot to what was done in the couple of countries that I mentioned, there are very interesting examples in Latin America within specifically digital government, especially countries like Uruguay, again, like Colombia, Peru tried to do it. So it's very, very interesting, because that's picking up a lot that's one of the areas that we were looking at to assess the status of digital government in Latin America. And surprisingly, what we realized is that there are many interesting examples across Latin American countries. Not all of them, but few of them, like the ones I mentioned, have been very forward-looking in that sense. And one country that has been doing many interesting things, both at the level of the city of Buenos Aires and the government of Argentina, was Argentina. I mean, the central government was Argentina as well, which brought actually the good examples from the local level to the central level.
Great, very interesting, very interesting.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much, Barbara, and this also for bringing a truly international perspective to that. Mentioning Colombia, Uruguay, Argentina, and really, bringing forward these examples. Sometimes it lacks a bit when we just, stay within the European Union, and also for raising ethical concerns on AI. I think it's very truthfully some important topics and a great perspective that you brought. Now it's the last chance for all attendees to ask a question in the chat, or just also you can write in the chat. We can unmute you if you feel like speaking. If not, I invite you to join our future sessions, and for that I will just share my screen So you can scan the QR code if you want. There you will be redirected to our Join Up page or to our Microsoft form, which can be used to have contact and stay in touch with us if you want to participate in future sessions, for example. Here you go. And we also invite you to our sixth and last session of the batch of iTalks we did this month and last month. It was Professor Gabi Umbach. She's a part-time professor at the Schumann Center for at the European University Institute, and she's a director of research at the Knowledge Governance Transformations in Global Stat. So this is going to be on Wednesday. So you're happy, and we're happy to see you there as well. If there's no further questions, I give the word to Maria Claudia.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Christophe. Thanks a lot, Barbara, for your inspiring presentation. We are looking forward to the list of resources so we can post your recording, but also your slide in our webpage, where basically everybody can have a look to our previous iTalks. Thanks again. Thanks also, Tena, for your help, and I hope to see you all to our last iTalk in a few days. Have a nice day, and grazie, Barbara.
Bye, grazie a voi, ciao.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.